She didn't walk out of that kitchen to make a scene. She walked out because someone made her waitress cry. And in Nyla Brooks' world, in the restaurant she had bled and starved and sacrificed 3 years of her life in a foreign city to build, that was the one thing. The one unforgivable thing. The line that did not move. Not in her house. The man sitting at table 3 hadn't even flinched when the wine splashed near his feet. He'd simply looked down at Jisoo, 19 years old, 6 months on the job, trembling hands and a wobbling lip and her whole body caving under the weight of his stare, and he had said, in the coldest, most clinical voice the restaurant had ever had the misfortune of hosting. "Do you train your employees to be incompetent?" And that was when the kitchen door swung open. Because Nyla Brooks had heard everything. She always heard everything. The room went still in that particular way that rooms go still when something is about to happen that people will talk about for months. Every fork suspended midair. Every conversation dropped like a hot pan. Every eye in the building, servers, kitchen staff peeking through the pass, the couple celebrating a birthday at table 7, the food critic pretending to read his phone, watching the woman who had painted those walls herself, who had argued with suppliers in broken Korean, who had cried in this kitchen and rebuilt herself in this kitchen and made this restaurant out of pure refusal to quit, walking directly, calmly, without hesitation, toward the most dangerous man in the room. She stopped at his table. She looked him dead in the eyes. She said, "You're rude. Get out of my restaurant." One of the men at the adjacent table leaned slowly toward his companion and said, in a whisper that half the room heard anyway, "Does she know who that is?" Nyla Brooks did not care who that was. If you have ever watched someone get asked to leave a restaurant by the chef, herself, in her apron, with her chin up and her voice steady and a packed Friday night audience, then you already know the particular electricity of the next 30 seconds. But if you haven't, stay right here. Because what happens next is not what you think. This is not a story about a man who gets humiliated and leaves. This is a story about what happens when a woman who has survived everything, who has been knocked down and gotten back up so many times that getting back up has become her resting state, meets a man who has won everything and is starving in the middle of his own abundance. And neither of them can figure out why they cannot stop thinking about the other. If you are already leaning in, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell, because at Domina's Corner, we don't do slow burns. We do slow unraveling. And I promise you, you do not want to miss where this is going. Like this video, share it with your people, and let's get into it. Now. Let's go back to the beginning. The real beginning. Nyla Brooks did not come to Seoul to fall in love. She came to survive. Atlanta had been everything once. The food. The community. The bone-deep faith that hard work, real work, work that cost you something, would eventually return something worth having. She had grown up in the kind of house where the kitchen was the center of the universe. Where her grandmother, Dorothy Mae Brooks, Grandma Dottie, to everyone who loved her, made red beans and rice every Sunday without fail, and the smell of it alone was enough to make you feel like the world was still fundamentally okay, no matter what the week had done to you. Nyla had learned to cook in that kitchen. She'd learned at Grandma Dottie's elbow, standing on a step stool because she was too small to reach the counter, watching with the fierce attention of a child who already understood that some knowledge has to be absorbed through proximity or it is lost. She'd learned that cooking was not just technique, it was intention. That the difference between food that merely fed you and food that genuinely moved you was the same difference that existed between going through the motions of caring for someone and actually caring for them. Food was love made visible. Feeding someone well was the closest you could come, without words, to saying, "I see you. You are worth this effort. You matter here." She had carried that belief all the way to culinary school on a full scholarship, the first in her family to go to any kind of college, let alone culinary school, which Grandma Dottie had treated with the same reverence as a medical degree. All the way through 3 brutal years in Atlanta restaurant kitchens that would have broken a person with less backbone. She'd worked under a head chef who had looked at her the first day and decided, before she'd cooked a single thing, before she'd opened her mouth, that she didn't belong there. Who had assigned her the most tedious prep work for 6 months straight. Who had told her, when she finally pushed back, that soul food had no place in fine dining. She'd answered by developing a fusion menu that stopped everyone who tasted it cold. It had taken her another year to find a platform for it. And another year after that to find the courage for soul. Korea had come to her the way some ideas come, sideways, through a window she hadn't even known was open. A 6-month stint in a Busan restaurant kitchen, arranged through a culinary exchange program she'd applied to on a whim at 2 in the morning after a particularly bad shift. She'd gone with no Korean, no connections, and no clear plan. She'd stayed because something clicked into place the moment she started working with gochujang and doenjang and the deep, fermented, umami-saturated building blocks of a cuisine that was, she realized, with something between shock and homecoming, not so different from the flavor logic of the southern black cooking she'd grown up in. Both cuisines were built on patience. Both were built on using everything, wasting nothing. Both carried the specific emotional intelligence of cultures that had survived hardship by learning to make abundance from scarcity. She had come back from Busan with notebooks full of ideas and the conviction that what she'd been building toward her whole career was not a southern restaurant, not a Korean restaurant, but something that lived in the space between, something that did not yet have a name but had a very clear flavor. Seoul had felt impossible when she first arrived for good. The language was a wall she had to rebuild herself against every single day. The culture was a puzzle with rules she kept discovering only after she'd already broken them. The food industry, at the level she wanted to operate, was a network of relationships and hierarchies and unspoken codes that she had no natural entry into. She was a black woman from Atlanta, speaking halting Korean, trying to open a restaurant in a neighborhood where people were polite to her face and skeptical behind her back. She had found a space in Itaewon, the international district, the neighborhood Seoul used for everything it didn't quite know how to categorize. The rent was steep for what the space was. The kitchen needed serious work. The dining room needed everything. She had spent 8 months building it herself, with Mina, her sous chef, her closest friend in the city, a Korean-American woman from Los Angeles who had her own complicated history with the industry and had said yes to joining Nyla before Nyla had even finished describing the concept. They'd painted those walls at midnight. They'd argued over suppliers in the pre-dawn hours. They'd gone back and forth on the menu for 3 months, cooking iterations for each other and taking notes with the focused intensity of people who understood that the menu was the argument they were making to the world about who they were and what they believed. She named the restaurant Brooks. Just Brooks. Her grandmother's name. Her name. A door she was inviting people to walk through. And slowly, painfully, humblingly slowly at first, and then with gathering momentum, people had walked through it. A food blogger from Tokyo had called the oxtail Korean barbecue hybrid the most emotionally intelligent dish I have eaten in 5 years. A travel feature had put Brooks on a Seoul guide that people actually read. Reservations filled in and stayed filled. By 29, Nyla Brooks had a full house most Friday nights. A kitchen staff she would walk through fire for. And a waitress named Jisoo, 19, Ernest, still learning how to carry 4 plates at once, who had, on a Friday night in October, accidentally spilled a glass of Bordeaux near a VIP table. The wine hadn't even touched the man. It had splashed the marble floor 2 feet from his shoe. But he had looked at Jisoo like she'd committed a crime. And then he'd opened his mouth. His name was Kang Joon-ho. Nyla didn't know that yet when she walked out of the kitchen. She knew one thing: a man in a black dress shirt with an expensive watch and the posture of someone who had never, in 35 years, been told to wait, was making her 19-year-old waitress fold like a piece of paper. She walked through the room at exactly the pace she always walked, calm, deliberate, without drama, and stopped at his table. He was tall. Lean but not thin, the kind of build that suggested discipline. Clean hands. A silver ring on the right hand. One simple earring. Dressed with the specific simplicity of people who spend a great deal of money to look like they're not thinking about money. And watching her arrive at his table with the slightly calculating expression of a person used to having every room read him as a fixed, unmovable fact. She looked at him the way her grandmother used to look at anyone who came into her kitchen thinking they could disrespect someone under her roof. Steady. Certain. Completely without fear. "You're rude," she said. "Get out of my restaurant." Does she know who that is? The whisper from the next table again. Louder this time. She still did not care who he was. Joon-ho looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then, with the measured efficiency of a man who had made 10,000 decisions under pressure and never once let you see him feel any of them, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, removed a matte black card, and set it on the white tablecloth with 2 fingers. "For the meal," he said quietly, "and the inconvenience." He rose. Straightened his cuffs, a small, precise gesture that Nyla would, infuriatingly, remember for weeks afterward. And walked toward the door. But he paused at the threshold. And he looked back at her. Not angry. Not wounded. Not embarrassed. Curious. Like he had just encountered something genuinely unexpected in a life that had run out of surprises. Nyla went back to the kitchen, pulled Jisoo into the prep room, let the girl cry for exactly 4 minutes, not because 4 minutes was a rule but because Nyla had learned that people needed a little time but not too much time before being told they'd done nothing wrong, made her barley tea, and told her directly and firmly that no customer's ego was worth a single one of her tears. Then she went back to her station, picked up her knife, and tried very hard not to think about the way he'd looked at her when he left. She failed at the second part. He came back the next night. Alone. No security. No companions. Same table, same calm expression, as though he'd simply stepped out briefly and was resuming something that hadn't been finished. Nyla saw him from the kitchen window and felt the irritation rise in her chest like the first pressure of steam in a covered pot. She went out herself. "We're full," she said. He looked around the dining room. Saturday night, second seating, maybe 60% capacity at the moment. He looked back at her. "Clearly," he said. She stared at him. He held her gaze with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite not a smile. It lived somewhere in the quiet space between amusement and respect, and it was deeply, unreasonably aggravating. She seated him. She would tell herself for weeks that it was because the revenue mattered. Brooks had been running thin margins. Every cover counted. It was a professional decision. Entirely professional. He ordered the tasting menu. Ate quietly. When she came to check on the table, which she never did for single diners, a fact Mina clocked immediately and stored for future use, he looked up and said, "The braised short rib is exceptional. The steak was overcooked." Nyla gripped her notepad so she wouldn't grip his lapels. "Then don't come back." He came back 2 days later. And again on Friday. And the following Tuesday. The staff started noticing with the particular attentiveness of people who work long hours in close quarters and need something interesting to think about. Jisoo, who had, impressively, moved past the wine incident with the resilience of someone who decided it was a story rather than a wound, found Nyla before service one evening and said, with great effort at neutrality, "That man is here. Table 3. Do you want me to tell him we're full?" "Seat him," Nyla said. Mina appeared at her elbow 40 seconds later. "Chef." "No. I haven't said anything yet." "You were going to say something about the man at table 3. "I was going to observe," Mina said carefully, "that the most powerful hotel heir in South Korea appears to have made our restaurant his personal Thursday evening ritual. He's a customer. He tips 400%. I correct the bill. He orders the most expensive wine to compensate." "I know. So you've noticed." Nyla gave her a look that communicated several things at once. "I think," she said, "he enjoys being annoying." Mina considered this. "Can't it be both?" Nyla went back to her station. The first real conversation happened 3 weeks after the ejection. Last seating had cleared. Kitchen was half-cleaned, the comfortable kind of half-clean that told you the night was winding down rather than still building. Most of the staff had gone home. Nyla had come out to do a final walk-through of the floor, chairs tucked, tables set for tomorrow's lunch service, the particular quiet of a restaurant that has done its job and is resting. She found him still at table 3. A glass of water in front of him. The restaurant empty around him. And on his face, when he didn't know she was watching, when the careful neutral expression had been set aside because there was apparently no one to maintain it for, something she hadn't expected. He looked tired. Not the tiredness of a difficult day. Something longer. Something chronic. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been performing adequacy for so long they've forgotten what genuine rest feels like. She sat down. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone deciding how much truth to spend. Then, "It's loud here." She frowned. "It's 11:30. There's no one left." "Earlier," he said. "During service. The laughing. The arguments at the table in the corner, every Friday they argue and then they order dessert, so it must be fine. The way your staff talks to each other. It's," he paused. "Loud. Alive. A beat. My life is usually quiet." She studied him. There was nothing performative in it. He said it the way you describe the weather in a city you've been living in long enough to stop noticing. "Quiet isn't always bad," she said carefully. "No," he agreed. "But empty is." Nyla sat with that for a moment. The word landed differently than she'd expected. Not as self-pity, there was no bid for sympathy in it. Just accuracy. The kind of honest, unornamented self-assessment that people rarely offer because it costs something to admit. She stood. "Kitchen closes at midnight. Do you want something before we shut down?" "Whatever you'd make for yourself," he said. She made kimchi jjigae with her grandmother's cornbread on the side. Not because it was on the menu, it wasn't, but because it was what she made for herself on the long nights, the nights that had cost her something, when she needed food that felt like being held rather than food that impressed. She set it in front of him without ceremony. He looked at the bowl and the small golden square of cornbread and then at her, and she saw something happen in his expression that she couldn't quite name. Something that looked like gratitude and something that looked like recognition. He ate every bite. Said nothing while he ate, which she respected. Then, where are you from originally? Atlanta. Georgia. Is there another Atlanta? The corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile. But the first completely unguarded thing she'd seen from him. How did you end up in Seoul? Long story. I'm not in a hurry. She told him the shorter version. He listened without interrupting once, not even the small encouraging sounds that people make when they're pretending to listen. He just listened. And when she finished, he said, "You came here with almost nothing and built something people genuinely love. That takes a particular kind of courage. Don't get sentimental on me, Kong." "I'm not sentimental," he said. "I'm accurate." She looked at him for a long moment. "What's yours?" she said. "Long story short." He considered. "Father built something extraordinary. I learned to run it. I've been running it for 8 years. A pause. I'm very good at it. And somewhere between learning to be good at it and actually becoming good at it, I stopped being much else." "That's not a long story," she said. "That's a short one dressed up as complexity." He looked at her sharply. "You're not your company," she said. "You know that, right?" He didn't answer immediately. And in the silence, she saw it, the slight tightening around his eyes that meant she'd landed somewhere real. She stood. Picked up the empty bowl. "Same time next week?" "Same time next week," he said. She found out the full scope of who he was from Mina, who had done her research with the organized enthusiasm of someone who had decided this situation was both personally compelling and professionally important and therefore justified serious attention. "Kang Jun-ho," Mina said, sliding her phone across the prep counter the following morning. 35. Only child of Kang Byung-jun, who built Kang Hotels from a single property in Incheon in 1987 into a 23-hotel empire spanning South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, and 3 properties in Europe. Revenue in the billions. Jun-ho took operational control at 27 when his father had a health scare. The old man is technically still chairman, but Jun-ho runs everything. She paused. He was engaged. 18 months ago it ended. Officially, mutual decision. Unofficially, nobody knows. The woman's name is Han Soare, old money family, shipping empire, the whole thing. Nyla set down her knife. "You ran a background check on my customer." "I ran a background check on the man who keeps coming to our restaurant and looking at you like you're the most interesting thing he's seen in a decade." Nyla said nothing. "The net worth is." "I don't care about the net worth." "Nyla." Mina's voice softened. "I know you don't. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying," she picked up her phone, looked at the photo on the screen, Jun-ho at some industry event, surrounded by the kind of people who existed in a world that functioned by entirely different rules than the one Nyla had grown up in, and said carefully, "I'm saying he has a whole architecture around him. And you should know what that architecture looks like before you decide how close you want to get." Nyla picked her knife back up. "He's a customer. Mina picked up her own knife. Okay. They cooked in silence for a moment. She came in, didn't she? Nyla said. The ex-fiancé. Mina stilled. How did you? The woman who sat at table 3 on Tuesday while I was doing vendor calls in the office. Jisoo looked pale when she came back from taking her order. I was going to ask you about it. Mina was quiet. Tell me, Nyla said. She asked if that was where Kang Junho usually ate, Mina said carefully. She ordered 2 courses. She left before dessert. And on her way out she said, a pause. She said, interesting place. I can see why he comes here. And then she smiled. Nyla kept her eyes on her cutting board. What kind of smile? She said. Mina was quiet for a moment. Then, honestly, the kind that isn't. She pulled back from him for 2 weeks. Kept service interactions professional and efficient. Stopped staying after closing. When he lingered, she sent Jisoo to let him know the kitchen was closed and she was doing accounts. He noticed. Of course he noticed. On the 3rd Friday, he came in at the beginning of service, earlier than usual, when the restaurant was still at its most alive and there was nowhere for either of them to have a quiet conversation. He ate. He waited. And when the room thinned out around 10:30 and she finally came to his table with his check, intending to present it with perfect professional courtesy and leave, he looked at her and said simply. What happened? Nothing happened, she said. Busy weeks. Nyla. I'm not someone who, she stopped. Started differently. I've worked very hard to build something that belongs to me. Something no one can take. And I have stayed very careful about the kinds of entanglements that put that at risk. I'm not an entanglement, he said. I know what you are, she said. And she meant it in the most complicated possible way. She knew what he was to his company, to his family, to the world that circled him. She knew the specific geography of power he inhabited. She knew what happened to people like her when they got too close to people like him and things went wrong. She also knew, with a clarity that frightened her, that the last 3 weeks of keeping her distance had been among the more genuinely unpleasant weeks of her time in Seoul. Han Soare came in, she said. A pause. Something moved across his face. When? 2 weeks ago. Tuesday. She held his gaze. She wanted to see where you ate. I think she wanted to see why. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Soare and I ended for real reasons. The engagement was, he searched for the word. It was a reasonable arrangement between families who had compatible interests. It wasn't, he stopped again. It wasn't what? She said. Alive, he said quietly. She stood there for a moment with the check folder in her hand. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I understand why you're being careful. I understand the calculus. I'm just asking you not to disappear. A pause. The Tuesdays. I would like the Tuesdays back. Something in her chest moved. She set the check folder on the table. Pulled out the chair across from him. Sat down. Tell me something true, she said. Not about the hotel. About you. He thought about it seriously, which she'd noticed was how he approached every question, even the simple ones. I don't remember the last time I laughed in public, he said. Not performed. Actually laughed. A pause. I laughed 3 weeks ago. Here. You were arguing with Mina about the ratio of kachuguru in the new sauce and you were both completely wrong and completely certain and it was, the corner of his mouth moved. It was very funny. She stared at him. We were not wrong about the kachuguru. You were both wrong in different directions. That's not, she stopped. Felt the laugh rising in spite of herself. Pressed her lips together. Fine. Your turn. Something true about you. I just told you something true. That was about me. Yes, he said. It was. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stood, went to the kitchen, came back with 2 bowls of the after-hours meal, set one in front of him, and sat back down. The Tuesdays resumed. Their rhythm deepened through November in ways that crept up on both of them. He started arriving slightly earlier, not dramatically, not in a way he ever acknowledged, but she noticed. 8:30 instead of 9. Sometimes 8. He would sit at the bar while the tail end of service was still running, nursing water and watching the room with the quiet attention of someone who had learned to receive rather than command. The staff had, collectively and without announcement, adopted him. Jisoo brought him extra banchan he hadn't ordered. Dae-sung, the dishwasher who had worked for Nyla since the 2nd month and rarely said more than 10 words to anyone, had taken to leaving the best cut of whatever was going to be staff meal on the corner of the pass where Junho could see it. Dae-sung likes him, Mina reported, as though delivering classified intelligence. Dae-sung doesn't like anyone, Nyla said. Exactly. The conversations deepened too. Not through grand revelations but through accumulation, the kind of knowing that builds the way a good broth builds, slowly, over hours, from 100 small things that are individually not much but together become something with real body. She learned that he had studied architecture before his father had redirected him toward business management. That he still carried a small sketchbook. That he'd shown it to exactly 2 people in his life and she became, one Tuesday in mid-October, the 3rd. She didn't make a production of it. Just looked at the sketches, careful, precise, buildings that had never been built and might never be, but that lived on the pages with a completeness that told you exactly what they would feel like if you could walk into them, and said, these are good. They're a hobby, he said. They're more than that. He closed the sketchbook. Didn't pick it back up for the rest of the evening, which told her everything about how much the honesty had cost him. She learned that he had not been close to his mother, who had left the family when he was 11 in a manner the family did not discuss. That he had one close friend, a university roommate now living in Busan, seen 3 times a year at most. That outside of that, he operated in a landscape of professional relationships and social obligations and people who wanted proximity to the Kong name rather than proximity to him. That must be lonely, she said. I didn't know it was until recently, he said. She understood what recently meant. She told him things too, more than she'd intended, more than she'd told anyone in Seoul. About the specific grief of building something your grandmother never got to see. About the night before Brooks opened when she'd sat alone on the floor of the empty dining room and thought seriously about going back to Atlanta, and then made herself stand up and set the first table, because she had come too far to give up on the night before it mattered. What made you stand up? He asked. I thought about what Grandma Dottie would say. What would she say? She'd say, Nyla Marie Brooks, you did not come all the way to Korea to sit on a floor. A small smile. She had a way of making failure feel like a personal insult to her dignity. It was very effective. She sounds extraordinary. She was, Nyla said. And the past tense settled between them with a quietness that meant he understood it. She would have had opinions about you. Good ones or bad ones. She would have fed you first and decided after. That was always her process. Feed them, watch how they eat, then you know who they are. How did I eat? He asked. The first night, fast. Like you were completing a task. She looked at him. These days you eat slower. He held her gaze. Things are different these days. She didn't answer that directly. She didn't need to. There was a Thursday evening in late October, the restaurant quiet because of rain, that she would think about for a long time afterward. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because of what didn't happen, which sometimes means more. After the last cover, she'd come out of the kitchen and they'd eaten the staff meal together in comfortable silence. A simple doenjang jjigae. No ceremony, no performance. Just two people in a warm room with rain on the windows, eating and saying almost nothing for 20 minutes, and being completely easy in the silence. That was when she understood what was happening. Not the conversations. Not what he'd done for the restaurant. Not the way he looked at her. The silence. The fact that 20 minutes in his quiet felt more restful than most conversations she'd had with people she'd known for years. She finished her bowl. He was watching her with the real expression, not the careful neutral he wore for the world, but the open, unhurried attention he reserved for here. For her. You're staring, she said. I know, he said. And didn't stop. She should have been annoyed. She picked up her bowl and stood. Same time next week. Same time next week. She went back to the kitchen, put her hands on the cool surface of the counter, and felt, against her better judgment, against every careful calculation she'd assembled, the unmistakable warmth of someone who is not alone. She had been alone long enough that alone had started to feel like strength rather than circumstance. Long enough that she'd stopped noticing the specific weight of carrying everything yourself. She noticed it now. She stood there for a moment. Then she turned off the kitchen lights one by one and went upstairs. Mina, who had witnessed the last 30 seconds of this from the doorway, said nothing at all. Nyla stopped walking. I can feel you not saying something. I am saying nothing, Mina said. I am a picture of discretion. I am the vault. Good night, Mina. He looked at you the way Daesung looks at the good knives, Mina said. Good night, Mina. The Soiree campaign accelerated in November with a precision that told Nyla everything she needed to know about the mind behind it. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was strategic, the careful disassembly of a business from the outside, applied with the patience and resources of someone who could afford to take her time. Nyla told Junho about it piecemeal, not hiding it, but still fighting the instinct to exhaust every self-sufficient option before accepting help. He listened each time with focused attention, asked specific questions she hadn't thought to ask, and said very little that sounded like advice. She appreciated that more than advice would have been. Do you know what she actually wants? Nyla asked one evening. Is this about you? Me? Both? Soiree doesn't handle disappointment well, he said carefully. The engagement ended on my terms. She understood the reasons. She accepted them publicly. A pause. But understanding and accepting are different things. She needs to be the one who decides things. She is, correcting what happened by making the cost of being near me too high for you to continue to pay. She's not wrong about the rational choice, Nyla said. No, he agreed. She's not. She just doesn't know you. Nyla held his gaze. Rational isn't really my thing. The not quite smile. Something behind it that looked, quietly and honestly, like admiration. No, he said. It's not. She was starting to understand the difference between accepting help and needing rescuing. That the first was something capable people did for each other, and the second was something she'd been afraid of for so long she'd conflated them. Junho had never once made her feel like she needed rescuing. He made her feel like she didn't have to be alone in the fight. And she hadn't known, until it was there, how long she'd been missing that. Stay with me, because this is where things start to get complicated in all the best and worst ways. If this story is already living in your chest, drop a comment right now and tell me who you are rooting for. And if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. It keeps Domina's Corner alive so we can keep bringing you stories like this one. The help started so quietly she almost missed it. A vendor who had been short shipping her orders for 3 months, causing real, measurable financial damage that she'd been absorbing by cutting from her own salary, suddenly began delivering full orders, on time, with no explanation. Her property manager called to say the landlord had reconsidered the lease situation, and there would be no renegotiation for the foreseeable future. 3 coordinated fake reviews that had been hurting her rating on every platform she was listed on vanished overnight. Nyla was not naive. She had not built what she'd built by missing patterns. She walked out to table 3 on a Thursday, sat down across from him, and put both hands flat on the table. "Stop," she said. He looked up. "Stop what?" "Whatever you've been doing." The vendor. The landlord. The reviews. A pause. "I don't know what." Junho. He held her gaze for a moment. Then set down his glass. "I didn't ask for charity," she said. "I built this without help and I need to know I can keep it standing without help. That's not pride. That's survival. That's knowing what you can actually count on." "Good," he said, and his voice was calm but she felt the change in it, the way it went from quiet to still. "Because I wasn't offering pity." "Then what were you offering?" "Correction," he said. "What was happening to your supply chain was not market forces. What happened with your landlord was not coincidence. Someone was applying pressure to your business from the outside. I removed the outside pressure. That's not charity. That's leveling a floor that had been deliberately tilted." She stared at him. Who was applying pressure? He held her gaze. "I'm still finding out." She sat with that. Felt the cold settle in the base of her spine, the recognition that the difficulties hadn't been random bad luck, they'd been targeted. That someone with resources had decided, for reasons she needed to understand, that her restaurant needed to fail. "Don't do anything else without telling me first," she said. "All right." She stood. Got 2 steps toward the kitchen. Turned back. "Thank you," she said. "For the vendor thing specifically. It was costing us real money." "I know," he said. "I looked at your public filings." She stared at him. "The supply issue was visible in the quarterly numbers," he said. "It's the kind of thing that looks like inefficiency from the outside but doesn't match the operational quality of the rest of the business. You looked at my quarterly filings. I was trying to understand why someone would want to damage a restaurant that was clearly viable and well run." Nyla stood in the middle of her own dining room and did not quite know what to do with the fact that the most powerful man she'd ever met had spent time reading her financials out of something that sounded, if she was being honest, like protectiveness. She went back to the kitchen. Mina was waiting with barley tea and an expression of studied neutrality. "You called him Junho," Mina said. "That's his name. You used to call him Khan." "Mina. I'm just noting the progression." "Good night, Mina." October turned into November, and November was when Han Soare moved. Nyla had known something was coming. She'd felt it the way you feel weather in an old injury, not precisely, but unmistakably. The woman who had sat at table 3 and smiled her non-smile had not been there out of idle curiosity. She had been taking stock. Measuring the situation. Calculating. The campaign against Brooks came in coordinated waves. First, a string of one-star reviews across every platform Nyla was listed on. Different names, similar syntax, clearly drafted from a shared script. Phrases like "underwhelming for the price" and "not worth the hype" that felt focus grouped rather than felt. Second, an anonymous health complaint filed with the District Food Safety Office. It cited specific violations that Nyla's inspection record directly contradicted, but the investigation still had to be opened, still had to be responded to, still cost her time and money and the specific anxiety of having her restaurant safety record questioned publicly. Third, an influencer with 200,000 followers published a "not impressed" story after a visit that no member of Nyla's staff could verify had taken place. The story didn't tag Brooks, it didn't have to. People found it. Fourth, 2 major suppliers called in the same week to say they were re-evaluating vendor relationships. One of them, she'd worked with them since the first month, sounded genuinely apologetic. The other would not return her second call. Fifth, an investor she'd been in serious conversation with about a second location went cold and then silent. Nyla knew. She knew with the certainty of someone who has been in the industry long enough to distinguish between a string of bad luck and a coordinated attack. She knew who was behind it. She could not prove it, not yet, and she was not yet ready to use the most obvious available resource to fight it. She handled it herself for 6 weeks. She spent reserves she didn't have. Filed legal responses. Worked the influencer angle and got nowhere because she didn't have the right relationships and wasn't willing to compromise the ones she had. She absorbed the supply losses. She ran the kitchen harder. She told the staff nothing beyond, "We're going through a rough patch, we've been through rough patches before." The restaurant stayed open. The food stayed extraordinary, she made sure of it, made sure with a ferocity that had Mina watching her with quiet concern from across the kitchen, because Nyla was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night and spending every other hour cooking or fighting or both. But the margins were bleeding and the exhaustion was a living thing, and there were nights, alone in her apartment, watching the Seoul skyline through the window, when she sat with the specific fear that the city had decided to be finished with her. Stay right here. Do not go anywhere. Because what happens next is the moment this story cracks open and everything becomes something different. Comment, "I'm not leaving," if you're still with us. And if you haven't subscribed to Domina's Corner yet, do it now. We make stories that reward people who stay till the very end. She arrived at the restaurant on a Wednesday morning in November at 6 a.m. and found the front windows shattered. Not broken by accident. Shattered, the specific pattern of deliberate force, the kind that required intent. She stood on the sidewalk in the pre-dawn Seoul cold, her breath making small clouds, looking at her own dining room through the broken glass. Inside, she could see overturned tables. A chair knocked through the pass. Kitchen equipment pulled from counters. She went in. The walk-in refrigerator door was standing open. A week's worth of produce, already beginning to fail in the temperature exposure. Her good knives, the ones she'd brought from Atlanta, the ones that had traveled with her through every kitchen and every country, had been knocked from their magnetic strip and scattered on the floor. She stood in the middle of it and did not make a sound. She called the police. She called the insurance company. She called Mina. And then, because her legs stopped working and the alternative was to fall, she sat down on the floor in the middle of the broken glass. Not to hurt herself. Just because the floor was there and she needed something solid and low. She sat there and let herself, for the first time since she'd arrived in Seoul, completely fall apart. She did not call Junho. He arrived anyway. An hour after she'd called Mina, because Mina had texted him the moment she'd hung up from Nyla, a decision Mina would defend forever with complete equanimity. "I would do it again," she said later. "I would do it every time." He came through the broken front entrance, stepping over the glass with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood the weight of the room he was walking into. He took in the damage, the overturned furniture, the destroyed kitchen, the open refrigerator, with the quiet efficiency of someone who did not waste energy reacting to what he could not yet change. Then he found her. She was against the far wall, knees up, arms resting on them. Eyes dry. She had moved through the crying and come out the other side into the quieter, more dangerous territory of not feeling much of anything. He crossed the room. His expensive jacket was going to be ruined by the glass dust on the floor, and she noticed this irrelevantly, the way you notice small strange things when you are in shock. He crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to her level, and for a moment simply looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, not the careful neutral, not the not quite smile. Something that had no armor in it at all. His hand came up slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, and touched her face. Just the side of her jaw. Just his thumb against her cheekbone, barely any pressure, like he was checking that she was real. Like he was asking permission to be there. "Tell me who did this," he said. And for the first time in her adult life, in a lifetime of handling her own problems, because the alternative was trusting people who had limited capacity or willingness to be trusted, Nyla Brooks let someone else carry the anger. "I think it's connected to Han Soare," she said. He was very still for a moment. His hand was still against her face. Something behind his eyes went from quiet to cold, not dramatically, not loudly, but with a completeness that told her everything she needed to know about what kind of man he was when something he cared about was threatened. "I will handle it," he said. "Junho." "I will handle it," he said again. No performance. No volume. Just certainty. She looked at him, this man she'd spent months being careful about, keeping at a measured distance, reminding herself of all the excellent reasons she had for not getting too close, and she thought about the broken windows and the ruined produce and the knives on the floor. She thought about 6 weeks of fighting alone. She thought about Atlanta, and Grandma Dottie, and the specific kind of stubborn self-sufficiency that had kept her alive through hard years but had also kept her lonely in ways she'd stopped noticing. "Okay," she said. He stayed until the police were done and the initial insurance documentation was filed. He made calls she wasn't fully privy to. He arranged for a cleanup crew that arrived with the kind of efficiency that suggested they had been waiting. He did not once make her feel small for needing it, did not once use the situation to leverage anything, did not once look at her the way people look at you when they have done you a favor they intend to collect on. He just stayed. She found out the full extent of what he'd done for Mina, who had been paying attention with the systematic diligence of a person who understood that information was protection. It was more than the vendor. More than the landlord. More than the reviews. He had been quietly investigating the campaign against Brooks for weeks, before the vandalism, before she'd even told him about the worst of the supply issues. He'd noticed the review patterns himself. Had traced them through channels she didn't want to know too much about. Had started assembling a picture of the orchestrated pressure and its origin. He had purchased the buildings on both sides of hers, not for development, but for control. So that no one could use her neighbors against her. He had gone to the investors who'd backed away and made it very clear what their continued involvement in the campaign would cost them. None of them had continued. He had eliminated the supplier problem at its source in ways that Nyla strongly suspected involved conversations that would never be summarized in writing. And then there was the thing that stopped her cold when Mina told her. He had been researching her. Going back. Her years in Atlanta. Culinary school. The kitchen jobs. The head chef who tried to sideline her. Her grandmother, he knew about Grandma Dottie, had looked up the obituary, had read what the Atlanta paper had written about Dorothy Mae Brooks and the community she'd fed for 60 years from a small house on the east side. He knows about Grandma Dottie, Nyla said. Mina, who had the sense to be gentle, yeah. Nyla put down the papers. Then picked them up. Then put them down again. He looked up my grandmother's obituary, she said. He wanted to understand you, Mina said quietly. Not your business. You. Nyla stood and went to the window of Mina's apartment and looked out at Seoul, the city she'd chosen, the city that had cost her so much and given her so much back, the city where she'd walked through more doors that weren't built for her than she could count, and felt the particular vertigo of realizing you have been running from something that you were actually running toward. She went to his office. The Kong Hotel's headquarters was everything she expected from the outside and more from the inside, 42 floors of glass and quiet authority in Gangnam, the kind of building that was architecturally designed to make you feel the proper ratio of impressiveness to insignificance. She told the lobby receptionist, in Korean she'd spent 3 years earning the right to speak, that she was there to see Kang Junho. He came down himself. She hadn't expected that. He walked across the lobby in full professional armor, pressed suit, silver cufflinks, the silver ring, that quality of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves without his asking, and when he saw her face, read it the way she was beginning to understand he read everything, and said only, conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Seoul spread out below them. She stood in the middle of the room and felt very far from Atlanta and very close to something she'd been trying to stay far from. Why are you doing this? She said. All of it. Why? He stood across from her. You know why. I want you to say it. A long pause. Long enough that she started to wonder if he wouldn't. Then. When I leave Brooks, he said slowly, the night ends. I go back and he stopped. Tried again. I have the hotel. The legacy. The professional life that I am genuinely good at. I have spent years believing that was enough. I've been very good at that belief. He looked at her. And then you threw me out of your restaurant in your apron and told me I was rude, and I sat in my car for 20 minutes thinking about nothing else in the world. The not quite smile. But real this time. Actually real. I'm not trying to own you, he said. I'm not trying to save you, you don't need saving, you have made that extremely clear, and I respect it more than you know. He paused. I am trying to stay close to the only thing in a very long time that has made me feel like a person rather than a function. He held her gaze. And that is not the restaurant. It's you. Because when I leave here, he said, quieter now, everything feels empty again. Nyla sat down. Not because she couldn't handle it standing. Because the truth of it had weight. And she'd been standing for a very long time. She told him about Atlanta then, the real version, not the short version. About growing up with the fridge that might or might not be full in the morning. About her mother working 3 jobs. About watching people with power move through the world and leave nothing but disruption in their wake for the people in their path. About the head chef who tried to take credit for her menu. About how she'd built Brooks not just as a restaurant but as proof that she was indelible, that she took up space legitimately, that she could not be erased. I know what you look like from where I'm standing, she said. I know the risk of getting this wrong. And I need you to understand that losing you would be something I could survive. Losing myself in the process of being near you, losing what I've built, losing my ability to stand on my own ground, that I could not come back from. I know, he said. Do you? Yes. I understand what I represent to you from a distance. And I am asking you to let me earn something different up close. A pause. Not asking you to trust me immediately. Asking you to let the earning happen. She sat with that for a long moment. Okay, she said. It was the most frightening word she had said in years. And also the most honest. Soiree made her last move in December. She had been patient, had waited until the relationship had its own weight, until it was something people in their respective worlds had started to acknowledge as real. Then she leaked a story to 3 separate media outlets simultaneously. It was a masterpiece of implication. It connected Nyla Brooks, by proximity, by association, through a carefully constructed chain of suggestions that didn't need to be true to function, to a minor corruption investigation involving one of Khan Hotel's former business partners. The connection was technically false. But technically false is often more than sufficient when the person being targeted has no institutional protection, no inherited credibility, no family name that generates automatic benefit of the doubt. Reporters outside Brooks within 48 hours. 2 regulars canceling without explanation. The Tokyo blogger who'd given her the first major review posting a "waiting for clarity" statement that managed to communicate withdrawal while saying nothing definitive. Nyla sat in the kitchen the morning after the story broke, very still, and looked at everything she had built and everything it had cost her to build it. Junho called. She answered. I can fix this, he said immediately. My legal team. I know you can fix it, she said. Then. Junho. Her voice was steady. She had made herself steady over the course of a sleepless night. I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it without trying to solve it. Yes. She took a breath. Every time I have let you in, something has exploded. The vandalism. The suppliers. Now this. And I know, that's not you doing it. I know who's doing it and why. She kept her voice level. But you live in a world that has real enemies. Strategic, resourced, patient enemies. And I am not built to be collateral in that war. Brooks is not built for it. Nyla. I can survive losing you. The tears were there. She let them be there but kept her voice clear. I have survived everything that has ever been taken from me. That is not bravado. That is just my actual history. A pause. What I can't survive is disappearing. Becoming a supporting character in someone else's story. I did not come to soul and bleed into those walls to become a footnote. Long silence. I understand, he said. I know you do, she said. That's the thing about you. You always understand even when it costs you. Will you be all right? He asked. Yes, she said. And she meant it and hated that she meant it. He said, I'll have the legal team address the story from a distance. Nothing that requires your involvement or visibility. Okay. A pause. Nyla. Don't, she said softly. Not right now. A moment. Then, the cornbread, he said. It was always the best thing on the menu. She laughed, surprised out of herself. A short, raw laugh that hurt and helped in equal measure. Good night, Junho. Good night, Nyla. She sat in the kitchen for a long time after she hung up. Then she stood, turned on every light and started the prep work for morning service. Brooks reopened fully in January. The city moved on the way cities move, quickly, without ceremony, toward the next thing. The scandal had faded. The legal responses had done their quiet work. The people who'd been pressured into participating had found better reasons to reconsider. And the reporters who'd stood outside the restaurant with their cameras had drifted away, one by one, when the story stopped giving them anything new to photograph. Nyla drove past the building the morning of the soft reopening and sat in the car for a full minute before going in. She looked at the front of it, the repaired windows, the doors she'd painted herself in the first month, the small handmade sign that had been there since day one. The city moved around her, indifferent and enormous. And she felt something settle that had been unsettled for months. She went in. Mina was already inside, apron on, beginning prep. She looked up when Nyla entered, took in her expression, and said nothing for a moment. Then, we're going to be full tonight. I know, Nyla said. Jisoo has been texting me updates on the reservation list all morning. She's very invested. She's going to make a great manager someday. I told her that. She cried for a minute and then immediately reorganized the entire table arrangement. A pause. She moves fast when she's motivated. Nyla tied her apron. Took a breath. Felt the kitchen around her, the surfaces she'd cleaned 1,000 times, the equipment she'd saved for and argued over and chosen with such specific intentionality. The walls she'd repainted in Grandma Dottie's color. The knives back in their place on the magnetic strip. The particular quality of the morning light in here, which she'd never quite been able to describe to anyone but had recognized the first time she'd walked into this empty room and felt something click. Let's cook, she said. They cooked. The reopening dinner service was not the most technically perfect service Brooks had ever done. It was the most alive one. There was a table of 5 women celebrating something. She didn't ask what, she never asked. People celebrated what they celebrated, who laughed so loudly at one point that the couple at table 6 started laughing too, just in response to the contagion of it, without knowing the joke. There was a man who had brought his elderly mother for the first time, who sat very still when the oxtail dish arrived and then said something quietly to her son that made him reach across and hold her hand. There was a birthday cake that Nyla sent out from the kitchen unasked, because Jisoo had mentioned it in passing 2 days before and Nyla had not forgotten. By 10 o'clock, the reservation list for the next 3 Fridays was full. By 11, Nyla was sitting on the prep counter in the kitchen, the one rule she'd made about never sitting on the prep counter suspended, as it was occasionally on the nights that had meant something, drinking barley tea and feeling, bone deep, like herself again. Mina sat across from her on a crate. You okay? Yeah, Nyla said. And meant it entirely, which was still somewhat new. Good. Mina looked at her for a moment. He's going to come back, you know. Nyla looked at her tea. He never really left, Mina said quietly. 7 weeks of holding that table and not coming in. That's not a man who left. That's a man who was giving you space. I know, Nyla said. Do you know what you're going to do? She thought about it. About all the careful calculations. About the risk and the cost and the excellent reasons she'd assembled on the wrong direction side of the ledger. About the broken windows and the nights she'd spent fighting alone and the way she'd chosen, in the end, to walk away because she believed the right thing was protecting what she'd built from the complexity of him. She thought about the silence on a rainy Thursday in October. The sketchbook. The way he'd touched her face in the broken glass like she was the most careful thing in the room. I'm going to make 2 bowls of jjigae, she said. Mina smiled. Set down her tea. I'll start the rice. She found the card in the morning. But the flowers had been there for a while, the water in the vase was perfectly fresh, which meant someone had changed it recently, which meant someone had been coming in. She stood in the kitchen and did the math. 7 weeks. Every Friday night. Reservation made, held, never fulfilled. The table set and then quietly unset at the end of each evening. She could picture it, Jisoo solemnly maintaining the reservation. Mina saying nothing. The rest of the staff understanding without being told that some things required patience and were worth it. She looked at the card again. The handwriting on the back, precise, economical, no word wasted. Every Friday. For the past 7 weeks. Not a grand gesture. Not a declaration. Not the kind of thing that asks for anything back. Just presence. Just the quiet, patient, entirely characteristic commitment of a man who had decided something and was prepared to wait, not because he was entitled to her eventual yes, but because he believed that showing up consistently, without demand, was the most honest thing he could offer. She set the card down. And then she laughed, that real laugh, the full one, and felt it move through her like something unlocking. She tied her apron. She had a restaurant to open. The scandal had faded the way they fade when the connective tissue isn't strong enough to hold, slowly at first, then quickly, the story losing its shape as the legal responses did their quiet work and the people who'd been pressured into participating in it found better reasons to reconsider. Nyla repainted one wall in the dining room a deep rust color that her grandmother had always called the color of things that last. She updated 3 dishes on the menu. She gave Jisoo a raise and a formal title, junior floor manager, and watched the girl stand a little straighter the moment she heard it. The first Friday back, she arrived at 5 a.m. Force of habit. The city was still dark and the restaurant was quiet and she walked into the kitchen carrying her coffee and her preparation for the long day ahead. She stopped. On the prep counter, flowers. Small, careful, alive. In a glass vase that had not been there the night before. No note on the flowers themselves. But beside the vase, a small white card. Restaurant stock. The kind they used for reservations. She picked it up. Konjunicho. Table 3. 8 p.m. She turned it over. On the back, in handwriting she knew now, precise, economical, the handwriting of a man who chose every word. Every Friday. For the past 7 weeks. She stood in the dark kitchen in the pre-dawn quiet of soul and read the card twice. Set it down beside the flowers. Picked it back up and read it again. And then she laughed. Not the surprised short laugh of the phone call. A real one, full and warm and rising from somewhere deep, the kind of laugh that means something has come back that you've been afraid was gone for good, the kind that feels like a door opening. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Tied her apron. Turned on the kitchen lights one by one. At 8 p.m. that evening, Junho walked through the front door. Black shirt. Silver ring. That particular quality of presence, the room reorganizing quietly around him whether anyone asked it to or not. Jisoo, who had been watching the door since 7:45, beamed at him with an enthusiasm she was making absolutely no attempt to contain. Nyla came out of the kitchen. She set 2 bowls on his table, the kimchi jjigae, the cornbread. After-service food. The meal she made when the night had been long and she needed something that felt like being held. She set them down. Sat across from him. He looked at the 2 bowls. Then at her. You came back, she said. I was always going to, he said. Simply. Directly. Without requiring the world's permission. She looked at him for a moment. You said the steak was overcooked. It wasn't. She stared at him. You. I needed a reason to return the second time, he said. The not quite smile, but more than that now. Something real in it, fully real, something that had been waiting for permission. The first time you threw me out, I already knew I was coming back. I needed something to say. Nyla sat with that. Then she picked up her spoon. Eat, she said. He picked up his spoon. They ate. The food was what it had always been, honest and specific and alive with everything she'd put into learning how to make it. But eating it across from him, here, tonight, it tasted different. Not better technically. Better the way things taste better when they are shared with someone who understands the cost of what they're eating. Who knows that the cornbread came from a woman in Atlanta who is gone now, that the kimchi base took 18 months to get exactly right, that every dish on this menu is an argument Nyla Brooks has been making her whole life about who she is and what she believes. He knew all of that. She had told him, over months of Tuesdays and Fridays, in the quiet after-service conversations that had become the part of the week she looked forward to most. He'd listened to every word. He'd asked the questions that told her he'd actually been listening, not the surface questions that people ask to seem interested, but the ones that could only come from someone who had been turning what they'd heard over in their mind and finding new angles in it. Mina appeared at the kitchen pass. She was not even pretending to do anything else. She was simply watching, with the unabashed investment of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this specific moment. Nyla caught her eye. Mind throwing something at her. Mina disappeared. Junho noticed the exchange and looked at her with raised brows. My sous chef is enjoying herself, Nyla said. Mina has been on my side from the beginning, he said. I know, Nyla said. She texts you. I'm aware. She told me you repainted the wall. She told you a lot of things. She told me, he said, setting down his spoon, that the first night I came back after the incident, the night you seated me when you said you were full, you stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes before coming back out to check on me. Nyla looked at him. She said you weren't angry, he said. She said you looked like someone who just seen something unexpected. Mina talks too much, Nyla said. Yes, he agreed. It's useful. She shook her head. Picked up her spoon again. They ate in silence for a moment, the comfortable kind. The kind they'd been building toward since the first rainy Thursday in October. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked at him. "I'm going to do it badly," he said. "I don't have a lot of practice with this." He paused. The saying it out loud part. "Say it anyway," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, "This is the first time in 8 years I've been somewhere I didn't want to leave." Nyla held his gaze. "I don't mean the restaurant," he said. "I know," she said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that." She reached across the table and put her hand over his for a moment. Just a moment. Then she picked up her spoon. "Eat your jjigae," she said. "It's getting cold." The corner of his mouth moved. He picked up his spoon. And they sat in the warm, full light of Brooks, the restaurant she had built from nothing, in a city that hadn't made it easy, sustained by the belief that food was love made visible, and they were, both of them, exactly where they needed to be. Outside the windows, Seoul was loud and brilliant and entirely itself. The restaurant was warm and full. Jisoo was floating 3 inches off the ground. Mina was stationed at the kitchen pass, making zero effort to pretend she wasn't watching every moment of this. And at table 3, the woman who had come to Seoul with almost nothing and built something people genuinely loved, and the man who had everything and had been starving in the middle of it, sat in the ordinary, extraordinary grace of a shared meal and let the evening do what evenings do when you finally stop fighting the direction you've already chosen. Some people fall in love gently. Like a long Sunday afternoon that eases into evening without your quite noticing the light has changed. And some people arrive at it differently. Through conflict and pride and the specific stubbornness of people who have survived so much alone that aloneness has started to feel like identity rather than circumstance. Through all the excellent reasons why it shouldn't work. Through the broken windows and the burned bridges and the nights that cost too much. Through all the smart, self-protective choices that are also the loneliest ones. Nyla Brooks was not someone who had ever taken the easy road. Kang Joon-ho was not someone who had ever, in 35 years, genuinely arrived somewhere he chose to stay. But here, on a Friday night in a restaurant built from nothing in a city that hadn't been built for her, surrounded by people she'd made a family out of, watched by a woman who had become her closest friend, eating a meal she'd made because it felt like home. She was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where she needed to be. And so was he. Not because the world had made it easy. Because they had both, finally, decided that the world's difficulty was not a good enough reason to stay apart. Sometimes the thing that looks like a fight is actually a door. And sometimes the person you threw out of your restaurant is the one who, months later, you set a second bowl for without thinking about it. Not because you planned it that way. But because some people, once they've found you, don't stop finding you. No matter how many times you show them the door. And that is the story of Nyla Brooks and Kang Joon-ho. If this story hit you somewhere real today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite moment from beginning to end. Subscribe to Domina's Corner if you haven't already. Every Friday we bring you a new Afro-Korean drama that will pull at your heart, test your patience, and always reward you for staying till the very end. Hit that like button. Share this with your people. And we will see you next Friday. Same time. Same table.